I think we're live.
So we are.
Thanks. Thanks for joining, Stephen. As I said, when I was trying to get people to sign up for this, I think you're one of the most important voices at this moment. Not to embarrass you, but it's true. And there's a million Substacks, and yours is one of the few that I try to read every day. So,
Well, I appreciate it.
the problem with
It means a
thankless
lot to me, honestly.
yeah, no, the problem with thankless task is no one thanks you. So, don't worry.
You do take that as a given, but you can't do it just because you're waiting for thanks. It has to be because it's necessary, right? It has to be that it's important. You have to wake up in the morning sort of convinced that I have to say something, I have to do something, I have to try to somehow make the slightest bit of difference while there's still a chance to make a difference.
Well, share with us your thoughts on tomorrow.
Yeah, well, look, I said to you before we sort of went live. I mean, I think this is such an interesting moment, and I particularly wanted to talk to you because you're somebody who's devoted much of your career to electoral politics, and I presume the belief
How's that going?
that that's the way that you actually affect the world. And we can talk about how the world has turned out to look very different than you thought it was. And you've obviously devoted a lot of ink to exactly that topic. I don't quite know how you handle it, psychologically when you see the kind of transgressions, the lies, the hostility that is going on within the Republican Party on a daily basis, including toward No Kings, where they're talking about it as hate America reality, and this is going to be made up of Antifa and pro-Hamas terrorists, and this kind of just absolute ridiculousness.
You know,
But it tells me that they're afraid of the fact that 10 million or more people, double the number that came in June, are going to show up because they're angry, they're upset about the direction of the country and the malignancy of Donald Trump and his government. And I'm particularly, honestly, interested in. I mean, I think this is the very important moment. I'm not a great believer that at this point that the elected Democrats or almost any of the elected officials are going to save us. I think that we the people, the collective power and the collective power that comes from millions of Americans saying that what's happening is wrong is so critical right now. And that's a protest like No Kings. I think it needs to be sustained. I think we also need to talk about things like economic boycotts and national strikes as sort of next steps in it, but all sort of under the banner of the necessity of collective power. So
yeah,
that's where I'm interested in whether there's been an evolution in your own thinking about the importance of it.
Oh, well, look, Stephen, like you said, I have written about this. There are a lot of people who are wrong about Trump in 2016, but it's really hard to find anybody who was more wrong than me. I didn't think that he was going to win the primary. I didn't think he was going to win the general. And when he did, I came out of Bush world, compassionate conservative, all that. I mean, me, Nicole Wallace, Matthew Dowd, Mark McKinnon, we used to literally sit in the same room. Mike Gerson is, ended up as a Washington Post reporter, sadly died a couple of years ago. Pete Wehner. Um, and I think it's fair to say that we saw the dark side of the party, but that we thought that we were the dominant gene.
Mm.
If only because the country was changing so much, the parties usually do what's in their best interest and it would change. But I don't know any honest conclusion to come to, but we were wrong and that we were the recessive gene. And, if you look at the history of the party after World War II, I think there were two strands, an Eisenhower strand that was boring, governing, sane, and a Joe McCarthy strand.
Yeah.
That was conspiratorial, xenophobic, often racist, non-governing. And I think that's what the party ultimately wanted to be. I mean, no one has to vote for Donald Trump. The party is what it wants to be.
Yeah.
When In my world, my tribe call it, when Trump got elected, there was a lot of talk how Trump had hijacked the Republican Party. And I wanted to believe that in the worst way. But the problem I had with that is, it's like,
Yeah.
the hijacker is never popular on the plane. People never say, "Oh, great, we're going to go to Cuba, not grandma's house." And Trump was tremendously popular. So how do you say that he hijacked the party?
He exposed the party for what?
I That's the question. Did he change it or reveal it? I come down on he revealed the party, and he gave the party and gave people permission to be their worst selves, which is a pretty easy thing to be. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, demagogues are awfully talented at exactly that.
yeah,
There's a history of them, and throughout the 250 years of the country, there's been demagogues who have been successful at tapping into the worst impulses of the country, and obviously that's why you had George Washington in his farewell address, and Alexander Hamilton, who assisted that address, and before that, talking about the dangers of despotism and demagogues who would sort of come in and exploit those worst instincts and ultimately feast on the ruins of public liberty.
I think what's different about this, we've had, as you say, a lot of hate figures, hate movements in America. I think what's different about this moment is that we never had a major national party adopt it.
Mhm.
Um, George Wallace didn't win the Democratic nomination. And if George Wallace had, I think Democrats would have walked away from him and probably started a new
Yeah,
party. But he wasn't going to win. Um, and
Patriotism didn't win. I mean, he had some success. I mean, right, these guys who were giving a sign of that direction.
yeah, I mean, but the Democratic Party looked to George Wallace and said, okay, we don't want to be this ultimately. Whereas Republicans looked to Donald Trump and go, yeah, this is what we want to be. This is who we are. And I think that's really what's most disturbing about this. I don't see the Republican Party as a traditional American political party now. I think it's an extremist movement.
Mhm.
And, I say this as someone that spent like far too many years of my life pointing out flaws in the Democratic Party, but it's the only pro-democracy party in America. And I think there's sort of two alternate or two truths that we have to hold concurrent. One is that elections may not be enough, but elections are really important.
Yeah,
And I think that Democrats, um, the only reason we're in this situation, in this disaster, in this terrible
nightmare.
crisis, is because they won elections.
Yeah.
And the
Can
first,
I just add, they
yeah,
won elections, and 77 million people said yes to this, and 89 people stayed at home, right?
yeah, no, no,
89 million eligible voters who chose not to participate, who chose not to pursue their most basic duty as citizens, who are sadly just as responsible for this moment as all the ones who said yes to the guy.
yeah, I mean, I think I think there's two things here. One, uh, Democrats need to win the House, obviously. I mean, that's absolutely critical. But once they do, what they do is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And I think it's really crucial that the Democratic Party accepts that they are not a governing party, they are an opposition party. They are a dissident movement.
Mm.
And there is no goodwill compromise to be had with Republicans. It's just not. It's not going to happen. It blows my mind, Stephen. I know a lot of these Republican office holders. I helped elect far too many. It's a pain in the ass to get elected to the Senate.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to go through all these personal humiliations. You don't get paid that much money. I mean, so now you finally get elected to the Senate. What do? You get there just to say yes to Donald Trump? I mean, in essence, you're like the drama in Russia,
Yeah.
saying whatever Putin wants. I
Well,
just don't get that from an ego sense, even. Like, why?
yeah.
Why is it?
Yeah,
And I think,
is it proximity to power? Is it just or is it at this
well,
point that it's fear? I mean,
well,
it's genuinely fear, and we've heard this enough times already of people who say that they get death threats and they get all kinds of threats, and they're afraid of unleashing the fury that comes with saying no to Trump.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
have
this is a
0.
gangster state, and that, in my
It
view,
is. It
don't
is,
cross
but
the mafia boss.
I have 0 patience with that. I mean, they're heirs to the greatest generation. No one's asking them to charge a machine gun nest, take a beach. All they had to do in 2020 was get their comm shop to put out a statement congratulating the president-elect of the United States, which is a pretty low bar as far as
Yeah.
defending democracy goes. I wrote about this in Lincoln Square. I've been thinking about this a lot. Um, I think something happened inside the Republican Party that we did. I think that we developed a species of candidates who are knew that the way to advance was through compliance,
Mm.
that it was by being weak, not strong. It was by following, not leading. And this probably, like most things in American politics, goes back to race. In 1956, Eisenhower got 39% of the black vote. It dropped to 7% with Goldwater when he opposed the civil rights movement.
Mm.
Trump in 20 got 8%. That's 1 point every 56 years. So we became a party that was to win. And this is sort of an obvious thing, but it really struck me when I was thinking about it. No Republican in the modern era has ever been elected without a majority of the white vote.
Mm.
I mean, I don't think in anywhere, in
Yeah.
any office, on any level, mayor or down to city councilman. Um, so once you realize that you have a very homogeneous audience and you're going to try to just appeal to them, I think that you do this for decades and it creates a certain kind of candidate where,
Yeah.
yeah, for all the talk of, John McCain being maverick and everything, the party punished people who wanted to be independent and they rewarded people who would go along with whatever the message was from the top.
Yeah.
So it's like a genetic experiment. So we end up with these people who are very weak and very compliant.
Right. But add into that is the racism, right? The bigotry, the hatred that either they believe to their core or they've been willing to go along with, right? The complicity or the compliance that leads them to turn their head or for that matter applaud it. And that's what I mean, even if you say, okay, they were speaking to their audience, their white audience. I mean, not every white person is a racist and a bigot. I mean, they've made some sort of a calculation that there were enough that would fit that picture
Well, listen,
that
Stephen,
it
I
would
can,
serve their interest in being able to incite that public to get them involved.
when I was working in the Romney campaign, we'd look at polls and we could see that there was a certain percentage of potential Republican voters, all white, who could have cared less about what we were talking about. I mean, smaller government or jobs or they didn't care. But if you were going to go down and do what Trump did, Mexicans are rapists, wave the bloody shirt, play the whole race card, they would wake up. They would like this. They would attract. Now, I would have bet that if you did that, the voters that you gained on that side, you would lose with college-educated Republicans. And that's what was happening in 16 right up until the Comey letter. And once the Comey letter, it's just enough college-educated Republicans were pushed over to elect Trump. But I don't think that we talk enough about race in our politics. I don't understand it. When they say Trump carries evangelicals, no, 97% of black evangelicals vote against Trump.
Mm.
I mean, you
Yeah.
know, it's so he won the working class. No, he won the white working class.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that we don't address that enough. Now, look, when I worked in the party, I worked for Bush. We failed at this. We weren't any better at it, but at least we admitted it was a failure.
Mm.
Which
Mm.
I think, does that matter? I think it does. I mean, in 2005, the chairman of the party, Ken Mellman, went before the NAACP and gave a speech apologizing for the Southern strategy. I think that means something,
Yeah. Well, look, I mean,
because
I
the
think
party has just abandoned that now.
yeah, and I think that's why I mean, we started by talking about no kings. Why is it important? I mean, I think it's important because, not only is it about sort of, creating a solidarity and a picture of, I hope, more than 10 million, more than 12 million Americans who say that this is not what they want, but it's also about uh, asserting values and principles, right? Asserting ideas about the America that we want, right? The better America that was rooted in the Declaration of Independence for equality and all that sort
Yeah.
of goes along with that. And so to me, I mean, in some ways, and I honestly look at tomorrow, the No Kings, as a kind of celebration day, right? As an opportunity to celebrate America, and good for these ridiculous, cynical, hateful, mindless Republicans who got their talking points to call it a hate America rally, a hate America rally, and to assert that it's going to be terrorists and
Yeah.
all
I mean,
kinds of
first,
other people. And I think that in some ways that nonsense, I hope, pisses enough people off that they're
I
more
listen.
motivated to participate.
I couldn't agree more. If nothing else, I mean, if I was still working in the Republican Party, God help me. But that's a really stupid spin,
Mm,
to say that it's a hate America party. I mean, the smarter thing to do is to say, look, a lot of people don't agree with what the president's doing. We accept that. They should have their voices. You should embrace it. And that's the fastest way to make something go away.
yeah,
You need conflict to create tension, and but they can't admit it because the way you rise in the party now is through increasing purity test, which is just a hallmark, as you well know, of extremist movements. So, you have this absurd human who is press secretary. The White House is up there saying this is Hamas and all this stuff. I mean,
yeah.
this is just stupid.
Oh, to be specific, the Democratic Party is made up of terrorists, violent criminals, and undocumented immigrants.
I
I mean,
mean,
who is that person?
it's just stupid. I mean, it's like saying what they said in 20. It was some Venezuelan thing that stole the election that involved space lasers but that's what you have to do. Because I mean, to it is
Because
a
that's the way to
thresh
get on Fox News today.
but to get approval and to rise. Look, it is a threshold reality of the Republican Party that you cannot be a member in good standing if will assert who won the 20 election. That's a that's we're kind of used to that now, but that's really extraordinary.
Yeah,
I mean, to say what fifth, you can't be in the party if you say what third graders know is true. Um, and I, I can't tell you how this ends, but I do know that the 24 election was not an endorsement of Trumpism.
yeah,
This was an election on election day. The right track of the country was 27%.
yeah,
In our modern politics, no incumbent party has won when it was below 45.
yeah.
And the president's approval rating was 40. No incumbent party's ever gotten more than 2 points higher
Yeah,
before
I mean, look,
Harris did.
I think you have to layer into that the information silos, right? The inability of significant portions of the Trump voter to actually pay any attention to political news, sort of beyond the most extreme sort of siloed outlets. And look, I think. I think it's why I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do. I
Yeah.
think it's why you're trying to do, and Lincoln Square is trying to make an effort to affect the narrative in some way, and ring an alarm bell and sort of expand people's capacity to imagine. We've hoped in 2024 what this Trump second term would lead to, but now to sort of help people to understand this isn't a five-alarm fire, and business as usual is no longer an appropriate response to it. The way you've been doing things no longer makes sense. And you, and I mean elected officials, but you, every American, is also, I think, needing to think about what can you do? How can I participate? What can I say? Who can I talk to? to? What stranger might I say something to at the grocery store? What are the things that I can do? Not just in the big events of an October 18th and the next one and the next one, where there's this kind of coordination at that extraordinary level, but every day. And to be able to hold on to a sense that their victory, and this is just the way I think
Well,
about it, their
well,
victory is not inevitable.
if I were in the Democratic Party, I would have the party wake up every day and say, "We're right, they're wrong.
Mhm.
There's more of us than there are of them."
Yep.
This whole idea, it's kind of Ezra Klein, where we all have to get along. It's a terrible way to run politics.
Yeah.
But it's not how you do it. You need to say that these people are wrong. You shouldn't be shy away from that, and you should say why they're wrong. And you should be the party that it is the party. Democrats are the party that best represents what it means to be an American, in the
Yeah.
sense that we embrace what it means to be an American, and aspirational, uh, better. Somehow that we can come together and be bigger than ourselves. But look, I've got a piece coming out this weekend in Lincoln Square where, write that I think that i- these governors need to start taking very seriously in blue states
Mhm.
forming their own state militias. And there's actually some interesting legal stuff here. The National Guard, when it was created, was always under both state and federal authority. And the battles we see in the courts now are between, what justifies federalization, who can control it. But that happened in 1940 when the National Guard was federalized, really become part of the heading into World War II, become part of the military. And when that happened in 1940, they passed a law creating state defense forces.
Mm.
And about 25 states have those now. They're pretty, um,
And this is distinct from National Guard.
and they are specifically under the the law that authorized them, specifically state controlled.
Mm.
They cannot be federalized. So there's a California, I think it's basically the California Guard.
Mm.
There's one in New York. It's called the New York Guard. Illinois has a law that provides for this, but it hasn't been activated. So I would
Interesting.
get about the business if I
Yeah.
was a Newsom, a Pritzker, or a Holtz. I would stand up these serious state militias. Now, what does that mean? Is this sort of a prequel to that film Civil War? Well, you don't know what it means, but we do know with Trump
Yeah.
that to operate out of a position of strength
Yeah,
is
the only,
is
Pritzker said it well early on. The only way you respond to a bully is a punch in the face. And look, I think, I mean, it's a very interesting thing.
I wish Chris Christie, as a former client of mine, I wish that's what Chris Christie had done instead of endorsing Trump.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing about that, I mean, what you're describing is that I worry that what would be the response of too many, even Democratic governors, is to say, "Oh, we don't want to exacerbate the conflict," and it's exactly the reluctance to exacerbate the conflict that Trump has exploited
Exactly.
again and again and again, and we're in this problem. And I don't want to put everything on Merrick Garland, but we're in this problem because Donald Trump was never held accountable
Absolutely.
after January 6th, and that made it possible for him to run for public office again. And again, this unwillingness to risk the ire of a portion of our population, right? The angry, MAGA faction, and this is how they keep getting away with inch by inch and mile by mile, stripping away our
Yeah,
rights.
I don't want to find common ground with the guy in the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt.
Yeah,
I really don't. I
yeah,
I think that's evil, and I don't want to find common ground with evilness. I
yeah. And
think
I'm
that
assuming
in
at the
itself
other end of
is
it,
evil.
you also don't want to be responsible for igniting, a bloody civil war. But at some point, the opposition has to stand up.
Listen, I think that if if you and I had been talking exactly a year ago, And we had come to the conclusion that a year from now, there was going to be an army with a budget larger than the Marines of masked men chasing gardeners through Brentwood
Mm,
and doing paramilitary secret force controlled by Stephen Miller,
mm,
who's just a psychopath.
yeah,
People would have said we were crazy. And yet that's where we are. So that's why I think that you have to look at all of these alternatives. And when Democrats win, and I wrote a piece about this, the first day, first of all, I would hold the House open for 24 hours and I would get a lot of stuff done. I would vote to nationalize SpaceX. I'd vote to nationalize Starlink. I would vote to demand to cut off all funding for the executive branch. You have to do these big things.
yeah,
And, one thing that as Republicans we were good at, and what we've tried to do with the Lincoln Project is don't shy away from characterizing it. You need to say, if you vote for Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense, you are not a patriot.
mm,
So, they say to him, like my old friend John Thune, who I've known since he was executive director of the Republican Party. I know John would say, "You saying I'm not a patriot, Stuart?" And I go, "Yeah, John, that's what I'm saying." Because it's what you do that matters. And you can't believe that, the town drunk should be head of the Department of Defense and call yourself an American patriot. I'm sorry,
yeah,
you can't. And Democrats should be more about these broad characterizations.
yeah.
And,
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I'm always reluctant to sort of go to the moral argument in the sense of I don't want to be higher and mightier than thou. I mean, I'm always sort of just personally I'm reluctant to it. And on the other hand, I just feel in this period has triggered my moral outrage at such a level on a daily basis. And it's okay to talk about the legal, and it's okay to talk about the judicial and the electoral and the constitutional, all of the sort of, the economic, all these sort of frames to understand it. But I think part of the act of patriotism is to sort of look at the essential moral values that were contained
absolutely.
within the Declaration of Equality and the pursuit of liberty and happiness,
Listen,
and the transgression of that
yep,
to pursuing ultimate inequality and pursuing hatred as an agenda. It's not just a affront to any patriotic American. It's a affront to, I hope, sort of just people's basic sense of moral sense of right and wrong.
yeah. Look, there's sort of a debate that seems to be going on in Democrats now with the shutdown. Should make it about the economy
Hmm.
or make it about healthcare, or should we make it about the larger things that are happening in the country? And I think it's a really false choice. And Chris Murphy's very good on this because I think you can do both at the same time.
Hmm.
And, eh, back in, the olden days when we had three networks and all this, in campaigns, you remember we would always try to have like, we're going to have like an education week. We're going to have a jobs week. Now,
I
it
do
never
remember.
really fucking worked because shit would happen, but
But
we
at
could at
least
least
it was
pretend.
spotlighted, for God's sake.
But we could pretend. But now there is no message that needs to be a single message. People are getting hearing what they want to hear from different sources of information. And you can speak to all of these. It's not contradictory when you're saying that there is more than one reason why it is critical that we not reopen the government that will fund the destruction of what we believe to be the American ideal. We're not going to do it. And there were a lot of people have huge problems because their health care is going to be more expensive. Will people die? Yes. But that's not all that's going to happen. Um,
Can we go back for a second to your
yeah. Yeah.
notion about the state militias?
Yes.
I made a particular point of kind of looking at this state health alliance that's evolved. I think in more than a dozen states that are
Yeah.
participating in it now, recognizing we can no longer rely on the federal government for advice and vaccinations and so forth under this, deranged regime. And so, that to me is a promising example of states getting together and recognizing their powered, at least democratic states doing that. Is part of the vision of the sort of state militias. Is there a way in which they interact with each other, or is it really very
Sure. Look,
distinct?
I mean, I think that we're in uncharted water here. And it's the kind of discussion that you can only have if you have a viable state militia. And I think it's better to, since you have the legal groundwork for this,
Mm,
and eh, militias were mentioned 6 times in the Constitution, something that's very important to the founding fathers. Most famously now in the Second Amendment that has led us, to have more guns than we have people in America. But I think that this sense of state sovereignty, which used to be a very Republican ideal,
mm.
is
Southerners
important.
used to use state rights as the argument for why they should hold on to slavery,
Yeah,
after all, to tell you how
it became
powerful the
it became
principle
a
was.
code word. And look, I mean, like I'm from Mississippi, right?
Mm,
Uh, 40% of the state budget of Mississippi comes from the federal government. 40%. And where's that coming from? It's coming from California. It's coming from New York. So the ultimate welfare babies here are these red states like Mississippi, South Carolina, Louisiana. And if it wasn't for the hardworking people in more successful economic states like California and New York, these would be deeply, deeply poor, even worse than they are now. So, I think
do you
that's an
see a
economic
future with?
power that should be flexed
Mm.
by these states. They
Do
should
you
be
think
reminded.
withholding their funds from the federal
I
government
don't
is
know,
a future we might actually
I don't really
witness?
know, I have no idea how that would work because, everybody's paying individual federal income taxes. It's how much you're paying and how much the state gets back. So it's not like, you're paying to the state and the state then is writing a check to the federal government.
Right.
Um, which is one of the reasons I like this idea of a state militia is because there is a legal framework for it now. And you can just take that and you can stand it up and it becomes very real very fast. Um, but, I find just as a side note, this whole idea that Republicans have decided that California is evil. Like California used to be the beating heart of the Republican Party. It's Ronald
Mhm.
Reagan.
Yeah.
And there's
Orange
more
County.
there's only one state, which Texas, that has more Trump voters in it than California. I mean, there's over 4 million Trump voters. So, I mean, we really all these people they're like evil
Apparently,
people.
they're evil too,
Yeah, I mean,
because they made the bad
it's
mistake
it's
to live
one
there.
out of it's 1 out of every 10 Americans. And when you start out, it's sort of an opening gambit to say, all right, 1 out of every 10 Americans is evil. And it's terrible. It's a pretty weak position to come from.
Well,
Um,
not to mention it's the fourth largest economy in the world,
yeah,
and I'm not here to advocate for secession. On the other hand, California is probably best positioned to go it alone, just about any any state in the country. So I don't know what the upside is of turning California into the ultimate villain here.
I got to give a shout out to this Canadian writer, Stephen Marsh, who wrote a book, The Next Civil War,
Mm,
a few years ago. Very sober book. And basically, Stephen's premise is that we are in a civil war. And that, what's the difference between January 6th and Fort Sumter? Well, no one died at Fort
mm,
Sumter.
mm.
And that even after Fort Sumter, there was this disbelief there was really going to be a civil war. There's always a period of denial about it. And I think it's a really interesting idea. And it's a fantastic
Yeah.
book. I encourage everybody to read it. Um, I- you know, ultimately, the reason Republicans are doing this is because they know that America is becoming a minority majority country.
Mm.
Stephen Miller's kids are going to grow up in a minority majority America. They're going to live most of their lives in a minority majority America. And there's nothing little Stephen Miller can do about that. Um, and Republicans know that. And that's why they're trying to curate the election
Yeah.
And the idea that the 24 election was some realignment, I think, is ridiculous. The Republicans are celebrating that only 87% of African Americans voted against them, only 65% of Asian Americans.
Mm.
And that's not really great. I mean, the core of Trump's vote is non-college educated white voters. So that's the fastest declining
Mm.
demographic in America. When like in 2000 we did Bush, that was 60% of the electorate. It's 39%. There'll be less when we finish talking. And they know this, which is why they're trying to make it so difficult for non-white voters to vote and trying to use these forces to intimidate
Yeah.
non-white voters.
Yeah. Well, and for me, you sort of layer into that. I mean, the sort of, denial of voting rights for significant
Yeah,
populations in our country, state by state and across the country on the one hand. And then, I mean, I've been sort of saying repeatedly, and I'm always sort of slightly nervous about it. I mean, Trump is waging war against America. He's waging war against America. These militarized, federalized forces
yeah.
are abusing and assaulting and kidnapping and doing all these things, and not just so-called the worst of undocumented immigrants. They're sweeping up American citizens along with the others, and we're all just sort of going about our daily business right now. And he's talking about ending, canceling democratic programs, quote unquote. The New York Times the last few days came out with a report saying it represents, in terms of the canceling and the freezing, of about $28 billion. 18 billion of that is sort of two projects in New York that are important for the growth of one of America's sort of the major city in the country, I would say. And this waging of war that is pitting Americans against Americans,
Well,
and doing it
and I think
violently. And my point is that um, you know this shouldn't stand. I mean, we shouldn't allow it. And I thought that that would represent a line that couldn't be crossed before 12 million or 20 million or whatever multiple of millions of Americans sort of say this has got to stop. This government has got to stop.
well, look, I don't. I think it's important to keep in mind that what they're doing isn't working.
Mm.
That it's a classic example of overreach. I mean, Barack Obama deported more people than Trump, but he didn't do it in this way. And, you know, who are the faces of the Republican Party? Extraordinarily unlikable human beings. A Stephen Miller, a J.D. Vance. These are weird people that have very broken
Mm.
souls, had very troubled childhoods. And there's something about them. Anger rarely attracts
Mm.
a lot of people who are not angry, who don't
Yeah,
wake up every morning
yeah,
mad at the world. There's a sense of, well, who are the great American, what do people like about a Gregory Peck or, Jimmy Stewart? They had this sort of American optimism, a sort of
yeah.
positive
And they
mood.
were aspirational figures.
Yes. And that's really, I think, a, a self-limiting quality
Mm.
to this kind of message. Um, I go back, when Bush did the whole compassionate conservative thing, people forget that uh, a lot of conservatives said to Bush, are you trying to say that being conservative isn't compassionate? And Bush's answer was basically, fuck yes. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. And, there's sort of a parlor game among some of us that what would Bush have been like if he hadn't become a wartime president?
Mm.
And the best indication is what he did before. And his major legislation was No Child Left Behind. Now, you can argue about the merits of this in a policy sense, but there's that famous photograph of Bush signing No Child Left Behind with Ted Kennedy over his right shoulder. I mean, now that would be presented like in a war crimes tribunal, like some sort of like in The
Yeah,
Hague.
yeah,
Um, but that party is dead, and it's not going to come back. And you can't unwind. Once hate movements become codified and formalized, the only thing you can do is defeat them.
yeah.
There wasn't a moderate faction of the Red Guard that emerged. It wasn't a moderate faction of the Khmer Rouge that said, "Okay, we've really gone too far."
Yeah, yeah, we
You
didn't
have
we didn't really mean it.
we didn't really. I'm sorry, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Can we
and
just have a redo now?
yeah, we're just going to
We aren't
forget.
really those awful. We aren't really those people. We're these people. The masks are off, right? I mean, the masks are on and the masks are off, and I think it is visible. I mean, I think I'm interested. Do you think that there's a point where it's not only defeating, and I think the defeating, a close election doesn't help because people think that they just that they won by a rigged vote or they won in a close election, which suggests that we still have power. We still have fuel to be able to keep this movement going. It's why I honestly hope that in 24 that Kamala Harris wouldn't just win, that she'd win overwhelmingly, that
Sure.
convince enough, the MAGA types that their direction, their narrative is not working and they need to rethink what the future looks like. So,
The only way, listen, I think that pain is the only teacher in politics.
yeah,
And until these Republicans start getting defeated, until they see that it's not in their best interest to be Trumpist, they're just going to continue. Because, I mean, think about it. Once you accept and endorse someone who encouraged the mob to come into your workplace and try to kill you, you think there's some policy disagreement you're going to have? Well, his position on the, I know he tried to kill me, but his position on the law of the sea treaty, that's really too far.
but he will be reducing my taxes, so it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, I get this all the time on social media, Twitter and stuff. People go, "Oh, cry your heart out." They say, "Hey, dude, you don't understand. Trump's helping me economic. I won here. It's not about me. I'm not being persecuted here, right?
Mm, mm.
I mean, I'm I'm
Not
just
yet.
a seventh generation white guy from
Mm,
Mississippi.
mm,
They're not coming after me because of who I am.
mm.
And it's that's not you do it because it's important for what it means to be an American. And I just think that's it's just the Republican Party has just completely collapsed as a moral force.
Yeah,
And we see it with Russia and Ukraine. And the party that was for decades the core of the most aggressive anti-Soviet Union, anti-expansive Russian Federation was the most conservative element of the Republican Party.
yeah,
And now it's the beating heart of the pro-Putin part of
yeah.
it. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, well, that's the combination of Donald Trump's alliance with Putin and Fox News's willingness to go along with that and emulate this
And
idea of
listen, Stephen,
who's
I
the
think there's
stronger leader,
I
Biden
think
or
there's
Putin.
there's there's another factor here that we don't talk about enough. I think a lot of Republicans look at Russia and they go, okay, it's run by white men. There are no women. There are no gays in Russia. I mean, Putin says. They say they're all Christians. They have elections that are uh, performative but not determinative. And they go, that's pretty good. I mean, tell me that's not what Ron DeSantis wants.
Mm,
Um, so they said, hey, not bad. So you have this graceful spectacle of inviting a mass murderer to the United States and having American servicemen on their knees unrolling a red carpet for him.
yeah,
I mean, this makes the Munich Accord, which was well intended at least, um, look like a declaration of war. Um, and it just shows all these things that we said in the Republican Party were values,
mm,
character counts, strong. They were just marketing slogans.
yeah,
We didn't believe this. The party never believed that. You
yeah,
don't change deeply held beliefs in a couple of years unless there's some reason.
yeah.
Um,
But
and
but you thought that there was, I mean, let's even put aside the specific principles. You thought that there was some sort of basic sense of capacity for shame, that if you lie through your teeth,
right.
that so visible, that's so obvious. It's a party of terrorists. I mean, that they're all sort of criminals, and they're eating the cats and dogs. I mean, things that are so obvious that you'd be laughed at because it's so obviously ridiculous. And again, my hope, and thinking about tomorrow and No King's Day. I mean, it's a day to celebrate, dissent. It's a day to celebrate peaceful assembly and the ultimate sacred value of the First Amendment, and the right for people to express themselves in a free country. This is something that is not, it's not negotiable, and it's worth fighting for. And to me, it's the ultimate expression of the "I Love America" rally that's there to assert that, and to
And the
to
Democrat look, the Democratic Party needs to be the party of patriotism.
mm,
It it that it is the party of strength in foreign affairs now.
mm,
You know, and that used to be a critical element to the Democratic Party. People forget in 1960 when Kennedy ran, he ran to the right of Nixon on foreign policy.
mm,
Nixon accused him of having a secret plan to invade Cuba. It turns out he was right. Kennedy was up there in those debates talking about a missile gap.
mm.
Um, and there was a very strong, muscular element to the Democratic Party. And I think right now it is a true statement that Bernie Sanders is to the right on foreign policy of the Republican Party. I mean, he may have gone on a honeymoon in Russia, but he didn't fall in love with Russia, and doesn't want America to become Russia.
Yeah, yeah,
And that really, again, that's something we've tried to do in the Lincoln Project because we use these images in the Republican Party, this sort of iconography of patriotism. Um, and it helped us win a bunch of elections we had no business winning.
yeah,
And that's really something I think Democrats need to embrace. I thought that if you go back and you read Harris's acceptance speech, I thought she did a very good job
yeah.
of
And it
this.
was very muscular, and to
Yes.
your point, and very muscular about foreign policy and the role of the U.S. military in the world.
Yeah, look, uh, it is much harder for the Democratic Party to be unified than the Republican Party because it's much more diverse.
Mm,
I mean, people talk about how Republicans are better at messaging. I've always thought that this was sort of a bullshit comparison because it's easy to put on a concert for people that like one kind of music. You find somebody that person's good. We're okay. We're not going to argue about. Democratic Party, you got to put on concerts for people that like all kinds of different music, which ultimately is a strength because that's more like what America is.
yeah,
But it's also a difficulty. And we see this playing out in the New York mayor's race. I mean, Republicans are going insane because you have a guy that's talking about maybe starting 5 city-owned groceries, and Republicans are nationalizing Intel.
yeah. You,
Like,
I mean,
really?
you heard Mandani's, as an aside, Mandani's comment about that yesterday, that Cuomo, $60 million is being spent for his legal fund for his 12 sexual abuse lawsuits. That $60 million is the amount that I'm asking for grocery stores to be able to make sure that people can eat. What's the problem here?
Yeah, and look, I think that these it is an insane moment
Yeah,
when we have a crazy Republican president who's demented, uh, appointing Russian stooges, drunks, lunatics like RFK across the government, and we're having a discussion about what's wrong with the Democratic Party.
mm,
Like, what? How did this happen? I mean, it's
yeah,
sort of like, how did we allow this to happen? And I think that there's something sort of in the DNA of the Democratic Party that has been more questioning,
mm,
that has been less confident. And you need to, I think, admit that you have differences, but that doesn't matter. And you can't look at polls and be led by this. I don't remember seeing a poll in 2007 that said hope and change was the number one issue in America. But Barack Obama ran a campaign that
yeah,
made it that issue.
yeah. And he
And
understood the implicit emotion of that as something that
yes,
would move people. It wasn't a policy position. An
Voting,
emotional response
you
to the
can't you can't
desire that people have to see a better world.
you can't look at voting like jury duty, a painful civic
Yeah,
duty that, okay, it's good to go to jury, but who the hell really wants to do jury duty? You'd rather like, you know, go about your life. That's a wrong way to approach this. It has to be something that is passionate. And this is why I think Democrats are so important that they lay out an agenda that is in stark opposition to Trump. They should be talking about what sort of national mechanism are we going to have to hold these criminals responsible?
yeah, yeah,
What
yeah,
national mechanism are we going to have to try Stephen Miller
yeah.
and these ICE thugs?
Thank
The reason they're masking themselves is because on some level they know what they're doing is illegal
you.
and they don't want to be held accountable.
Yeah, yeah. I think this issue of accountability is a critical one. I think it's why we're in this mess, post January 6th. I think it's why we're in this mess, post 1865. That we're still, the whole Reconstruction era. You had a lot of these Confederate leaders who were still convinced of the rightness of their cause and continued to
Right.
pursue it for a long, long time, and
The,
the
the
ripple
neo
effects.
the neo Confederacy of the Republican Party now.
Yeah,
It's the new lost cause. And look, I'm somebody that's named for Jeb Stuart. So, a cavalry general, named for a relative who was named for Jeb Stuart. So, I mean, I grew up with the lost cause.
yeah,
And it is just so amazing to me and dispiriting that there is this, we're having a Confederate revival.
mm,
Really? I mean, really, guys? First of all, we lost. So
yeah,
let's just, in 1960, Mississippi was the fifth richest state in the country. 1960, 1980s, 1960, 1860 was the fifth richest state in the Union.
mm,
1865 was the poorest. It's still the poorest.
mm.
Okay, we lost. We should have lost. Um, we should not celebrate traitors. And it's
I,
so
I, I think it. If I think about sort of the psyche of Americans, they always want to look forward. They always want to sort of focus on what goes next, and not to litigate the past. I think it's implicit in Gerald Ford's decision to pardon
right.
Nixon. Our long national nightmare is over. Well, no, it really isn't. That should have been adjudicated, and the decision not to adjudicate it, I think, has had a ripple effects in terms of, a
100%.
Donald Trump thinking he would ever be held accountable for his actions. And so, there's going to be a movie coming out in a matter of weeks called Nuremberg. And,
Mm.
I don't think the Nuremberg trials solved everything, but they at least were an effort to hold, you know, uh, many Nazis and Nazi leaders responsible, not the everyday people, but, there were 10 Nazi leaders who were hanged after their convictions at the Nuremberg trials, others that had committed suicide before they went to their deaths by hanging. And I don't know exactly how this all ends, but I think it has to include accountability. And you know, tomorrow is a step in that direction.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm hoping that. Uh, this is not a one-off thing. I hope it's massive numbers, but I think more than that, I think there needs to be a sustained commitment on the part of people. And I wonder whether you think. I mean, how does this end? Is it just an electoral decision that happens in a year's time or in 3 years' time, or do you think it really
Well,
is
look,
going to
I think
take boycotts and national, labor strikes and so forth to change the dynamic?
well, the answer is we don't know. But, we do know that politics is downstream of culture.
Mm,
And I think that what's going to happen tomorrow is really a cultural event.
mm,
It's not a voter registration drive, it's not a march on Washington for the Civil Rights Bill. It's a cultural reaction to a horror and an ugliness and a hate that's been unleashed in America. And I think that then drives politics of the moment. So I think, I go back to 2020, and on the Lincoln Project, we started a podcast. People said, well, what does a podcast have to do with politics? You go to 2024, and people are going, she lost because she didn't go on Joe Rogan,
Right.
and that's why what you're doing with your Substack is so important, and what we're trying to do with Lincoln Square, because you have to have all these different voices out there. So I think that, if you've talked to someone like Anne Applebaum, who's really studied these or Ruth Ben-Ghiat, these movements, it is a trait of right-wing movements to appear more powerful than they are.
Yeah.
And a sort of assumption of it. And I think that it's really important that people embrace that they are in the majority.
Yeah, yeah.
And
There are more of us than there are
yeah,
of them, and do not despair that they've won, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's exactly what they're hoping for. That's exactly
losing
what gives them the ability to keep going.
losing an election doesn't mean you're wrong. I mean, I my parents were anti-segregation. Uh, when segregationists got elected in Mississippi, they didn't sit around the kitchen table and go, "Well, maybe we should be segregationist." You know, it was like, "No, we have to win next time.
Yeah,
We have to defeat these people." And that's what is so critical. Look, Democrats lost an election. That happens on some level. That's a key element of democracy is somebody has to be willing to lose. So okay, you lost, big deal.
yeah,
You, you know,
yeah,
you need to win.
yeah,
Um, and it shouldn't losing an election does not need to trigger an identity crisis. It doesn't mean that you were wrong. It means that you lost an election.
mm,
And, we know when we look at numbers, this was just an election that a non-incumbent was probably going to win. If you look at, Nikki Haley, numbers show she was doing much better than Trump. It was an embrace of Trumpism. Now, whoever wins an election says they have a mandate. I mean, you're not going to go out and say, well, okay, I realize, we really don't have a mandate. It's not, it's like, you don't walk out of the Super Bowl and go, well, maybe we have a chance. I don't know. We could win. You have to assume you're going to win.
yeah.
Um, but you
But
can't let that narrative become dominant.
no, and I
Um,
think that includes, not letting the narrative like, oh, do we really think there's even going to be a midterm election? People, I mean, repeating that doesn't help. Repeating that
100%.
discourages people and makes people think that they shouldn't participate, and that's the wrong attitude. And I think that it's a wrong attitude also to presume like, oh, we'll sort this out in 2028. No, I mean, there's a five-alarm fire now.
Yeah.
And that, that I think is a reason for people to think very concretely about how they can participate now, not 3 years from now, not just by, going to an election booth, once every 2 or 4 years.
Yeah, the inability to imagine Trump has always helped Trump.
Mm,
It was very difficult to imagine him winning, and I think that he got a lot of votes, the people that were protest votes in 16. You know, particularly at the end after the Comey letter, voting for another Clinton it's not much fun. I don't know, I'm going to lodge a protest here, vote for Trump. Um, but it's really important that all of this be done with the sort of swagger. I just want to say to the Democratic
yeah,
Party, walk with more swagger.
yeah, yeah.
Go out
It
there
was
and
good advice.
seize it. This is your moment.
Yeah,
If there was not a Democratic Party, you would have to invent one now.
yeah,
And you should be about that business. And the smallness of the Republican Party should be its death knell. It should be something that you use against them.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and
I thought in 2020 that I thought that the Trump term was the last gasp of a dying breed. I really did.
look, I think
Somehow
we're a
they've continued
series
to
of,
fuel it.
history is at a series of very unfortunate events.
Mm,
Biden should have not run for reelection. He should have announced the day after the midterms that he wasn't going to win, that he wasn't going to run again.
yep.
And I don't think anybody I mean, look, I thought Harris ran a very good campaign and was a very good candidate.
I
And
did too.
if she was president now, she'd make an excellent president.
Yep.
But if you and I were sitting around on the night that Hillary Clinton lost, having a couple of beers, we probably wouldn't go, "Hey, dude, the way to win next time is a black woman." We're going to sense this. I mean, we have to realize, there's these certain misogynist,
Yeah.
racist elements of America that uh, make winning more difficult. Um, and that's not to say that you're wrong. So go out there tomorrow. Be
Go out with
confident.
let's take your words. Let's go out with swagger. Let's go out recognizing that it's a patriotic act. Let's go out celebrating, that it's people who still believe in the values of America, and are willing to stand up for it, and are willing to, express themselves, and express their most fundamental right of dissent against something that
Yeah,
they know is wrong. I mean, that doesn't get more American than that, and that's a beautiful thing. I'm planning to be. I know there'll be a lot of angry people tomorrow. I'm actually hoping to be kind of one of the happy people tomorrow.
yeah. No, I think that's exactly the right attitude. It's a personal power we have that we can
Yeah,
exert as Americans.
yeah. Well, this has been great. As always, Stuart, it's always a delight to talk with you. A pleasure to do it, and hopefully people found some value. I'd just say to everyone, if you haven't made a point of paying attention to Stuart's writings with Lincoln Square, you really should. They're always insightful, provocative, worth your time. And
Well,
if you
I have a lot of sins to atone for it, Stephen.
what's that?
I have a lot of sins to atone for.
Well, then keep
Yeah.
atoning. Can I urge you to
I
keep atoning?
yeah. Well, listen, brother, thank you for what you're doing, and look forward to next time. And let's have a great day tomorrow.
Likewise. Thanks so
Okay.
much, everybody.
All the best. Bye.